It's 10 times the terror.
Hello there. Getting old and senile.
Hello and welcome to 10 Times the Terror. This is Paul.
And I'm Ralph.
And we are very pleased to have with us Kelly Stewart. I'm sorry, your married name is
Harcourt.
I'm sorry,
Harcourt.
Harcourt, right. Kelly Harcourt, who is the daughter of the very famous actor James Stewart.
Woo!
And it is a great privilege to have Kelly here with us. Had a chance to talk to her a little bit earlier.
Thank you for including me. Thank you for including me. It's an honor.
Take a bow there, Kelly.
I am.
We really we're focusing in these podcasts. Again, we're as I told you before, we're two Presbyterian ministers who are fascinated with all this stuff. Part of it is horror and science fiction, which doesn't really relate to your father. But the other two genres we're interested in are suspense and fantasy. And your father is a major figure in those.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of ministers and monsters, you know.
Yeah, right. How about ministers?
Well, we've been called monsters a few times, believe me.
Right. But so let me kick off here, Kelly. We did talk about some of this before. I want to share with our listeners, some of that as well. But the image of your father, kind of his persona on film, was of a, kind of partly an everyman, a typical person ever could be, but nonetheless someone who was a very high principled person, a very moral person, a compassionate person, George Bailey in effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about your image of your father.
Well, it's he was all of those that you've just said. Dad has an enduring legacy in America, which constantly moves me and surprised me, and I think the reason for that endurance is because he never let down the public. He was true to himself and true to their image of him and what he came to stand for, and he never let them down. So he was always honest and decent, unpretentious, somebody who really cared about the greater good and even making personal sacrifices for others. And, that's what he was really like, and that's what he portrayed in the movies, George Bailey and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I think that really is what he was like. I mean, in person as a father, he was an introvert. He was very private, as I think many actors are. For instance, as a father, he didn't really tell us how to behave. He just taught by example.
We have to mention he was raised Presbyterian, right?
Yeah, and he went to church every single Sunday.
Yeah.
So what's that like for you when people sometimes erroneously think, okay, you're just like your dad, because you're not just like your dad, right?
Oh, I would hope that I have a lot of dad in me.
What I mean is they put you in the box.
Growing up in the growing up in Hollywood box, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but my parents were not that traditional image of Hollywood and glitz and glamour, and Dad left his work and his fame at the door when he came home, and so he didn't really bring all the Hollywood stuff into the house. So we didn't grow up like that. I imagine it's a lot different than growing up now in Hollywood.
Do you remember the first movie of your father that you ever saw?
Probably It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah. And that was unavailable for a while because of it's a copyright dispute, as I recall.
And then it went into public domain.
And then it was shown constantly.
Yeah. But
yeah, because I never saw it.
It might have not been It's a Wonderful Life because we had a projection room down in the basement, and Dad had some of his films on reels. Mm-hmm. And some of those films were the Hitchcock films. So I watched, first time I saw Rear Window, and The Rope was down in the basement, with Dad threading the film through the projector and everything.
Yeah. What, did he ever talk much about Hitchcock?
Yeah, Hitchcock was one of his favorite directors, and he really thought he was a genius. And he said he learned a lot working with him, just in about the craft. He said Hitchcock didn't give a lot of direction. He just knew exactly how a scene should be and conveyed that to the actors. And Dad just describes him as a genius.
Yeah, that's I just recently, my daughter, our producer, and my son and so we've all been big Hitchcock fans, and I recently, just getting ready for this podcast, watched both Rear Window and Vertigo again in this new 4K restoration, which is just stunning. But
is it really?
It really is. It's if you have, Blu-ray is good, but the 4K is a whole nother level up. And my wife and I just watched Rear Window again, which is one of the comments made in this is that in many ways Hitchcock was a silent film director, in that he shows so much of the film is just visual. You don't need. You don't always need to have the verbal, like the great scene where Grace Kelly has stuck into the apartment of Raymond Burr, and she's got the wedding ring, the missing wedding ring, and she's pointing that out to Jimmy, to your father, across the way, and Raymond Burr just looks down at her and looks across, and you can tell all this happened. Not a word of dialogue, but it's very clear what's going on.
So maybe that could be part of Hitchcock's genius, is that he started out, as you say, he learned with silent films, and that must make a big difference to the visuals. And his films are, they really are about those moments that don't require words.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I and I admired all of these. And again, it's like my generation did not grow up with It's a Wonderful Life because it wasn't on at that. That was the part when it was not available. I didn't see the film until I was in film school many years later. But I have to say, I remember seeing Vertigo at an early age. Probably when it first came out, I would have been maybe 11, 12 years old. And I've seen it repeatedly. I probably have seen it, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times. And that is an absolutely brilliant performance by your father, because it's an irrational world that you've got there, and you really have to be able to buy into it to get absorbed in the characters and the story. And your father's performance makes it believable. I mean, seriously, would Madeline still be hanging around San Francisco after this elaborate thing of killing off her lover's wife and so on and so forth? All these things that are, and you all of a sudden just see her walking along the street, and on and on and on. And he makes that work. And
I know. I have to watch it again. When I first saw Vertigo, I didn't really get it. And I thought, God, this is also kind of hokey, this thing spinning around, and then for more than once, it was considered, it was not, voted as the second best film of all time by the British Film Institute, second to Citizen Kane. And I always thought, I don't even think it's Dad's best Hitchcock film, let alone. And then every time I've seen it, I get a little more from it. You know what I'm saying? You just
right.
see more, and you realize really what it's about. So having listened to you say that, I'm going to have to watch it again.
Yeah, because it's really a film about obsession.
Yes,
and
it is.
obviously, but it's dreamlike. One of my theses about Hitchcock is he's in Psycho. Of course, it's not your father, but in Psycho, he set the film up like it should be a dream sequence. That then, and the dream sequence would be when Marion pulls off with the side of the road, or when she's first getting away with the money. That at you'd go back to that at the end of the picture, and all this other stuff would have been a dream, and she would just turn the car around and go back and turn the money in, take her medicine, so forth, get on with her life. It's set up that way, but it doesn't happen that way, and that's what's really scary. If you can't wake up from the dream, then it's really bad. And the Vertigo is like that. It's that idea that you're caught in a dream and you can't get out of it.
And so was Hitchcock trying to sort of send this message that we don't really know what's real and what's a dream? Like that he makes us question reality?
Well, I think he does in the sense in which we assert ourselves in the wrong way. Marion has made a bad decision in Psycho. She's embezzling, what is it? Embezzling $40,000 or something. But it's also that, that Scotty, or your father's character in Vertigo, he's making a play for the wife of his friend who's hired him to watch the wife.
Yeah.
We walk into that because it's done so smoothly, but you got to stop and think about, talk about being decent and upright. That's not a decent thing to do. And of course, then he gets caught into a deeper web.
But he's still the hero,
He's still right. He's still the hero, even though he's got that flaw, and he's fundamentally decent. But he's given in to something that's creates this obsession.
And I guess that's what Hitchcock was so good at, was showing what's under the surface. Showing the deep inner parts of all of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Vertigo was considered sort of a breakthrough film.
Absolutely, I'd rate Vertigo #1. I put it over Citizen Kane. But interesting. Yeah, in the whole course of that. And I was going to say is, if you can get the current version, the 4K of it, apparently the film, I guess the film producers or whatever in Europe did not like the original ending. And they insisted on a different ending being put on, which was never released in the United States. Yeah, this is all film history. Never released in the United States, but they have it on the 4K restoration. It's like the bonus section.
The bonus section shows you. So what is it? What's the new ending?
So the new ending shows Barbara Bel Geddes back in her apartment. That's the former fiance of Scotty, and she's sitting there, and on the radio, they're telling about the death of Madeline. That this woman, fell off of the high tower in the monasteries. They're telling about that, and she's just sort of listening, and then the door opens, and your father comes in, and Barbara puts, your character puts two and two together, that he would have been with her when the Madeline died.
Oh boy.
And so it's kind of a downbeat ending, and he goes to remember there's like these open windows, glass windows go down to the balcony. He just stands there and looks out onto the night, and that's the end. Hitchcock hated it, apparently, but it was that the distributors in Europe didn't like the original ending. So that's a fascinating. So he actually did film it. It was there.
It's a story in itself as to why they preferred that. And first of all, how can you take this kind of piece of art and just decide you want to change the ending?
But that happened a lot in the Hollywood studio system. There'd always somebody said, "Well, we got to put a happy ending on," time and time again, and it many times, almost always, it does. And originally, like in Suspicion, it was supposed to have ended with Cary Grant going upstairs with the poisoned milk. You remember that scene?
Yeah.
Giving that to Joan Fontaine. She drinks the poison, but she's asking him to mail a letter, which tells what's really happened. That she's willingly, going to let him kill her because she loves him, but he is in fact killing her. And at the end of the film is a close-up, apparently, of and I'm not sure if it's ever even shot, but I mean, it's a close-up of a mailbox, and Cary Grant just opens the mailbox, puts the letter in, and just walks off into the distance. And the camera stays fixed on the mailbox, and you know that he has signed his own death warrant because he's mailed this letter that's going to implicate him in the murder of his wife. Now, that was Hitchcock's intentional ending, and the studio said, no, people won't accept Cary Grant as a murderer, so you got to change the ending. So he did. I mean, those things happened. Even the great director John Ford, the end of Grapes of Wrath, wonderful ending of Henry Fonda in like a silhouette walking off, and then they tack on this goofy ending with the name of the actress, Maude Job, about, well, we're just folks and just folks keep coming,
Oh,
and like in our stuff, in the original Frankenstein, they tack on a phony ending again to give it a
happy ending.
Give a happy ending,
that would be like taking the ending of Anatomy of a Murder, which is so brilliant.
Yeah.
And having the guy actually get convicted.
Right, or we're stuff like that. How about having Hamlet lives and marries Ophelia?
Yes, that's a good idea. Let's change Shakespeare.
Change that around. Romeo and Juliet, they actually did get together.
Let's change their tragedies. They're too sad.
Yeah, well, because I think from our perspective, Ralph and me, from the minister's perspective, if you look at the Bible, it's got tragic story after tragic story, and the hope is at the end, though, that God is going to redeem His creation. Christ rises from the dead, but you're full of all through the Old Testament, just one tragedy after another, and
characters who are conflicted. They know what they should do, but they have these, they don't follow what they think they should do, and all these conflicted characters. I mean, like reality.
Yeah, it's the Apostle Paul says that in Romans 7. It says, "The good that I want to do, I don't do. The evil I don't want to do is what I do." Well, isn't that true of all of us? Right?
Exactly. I really like P.G. Wodehouse, the great author, and he wrote something, and he said there are really two ways to write. You can write about life as it really is, and characters, real three-dimensional characters, or you can just keep it completely unreal, funny, on the surface, wacky, and that's, he said, I decided to do that, and I kind of agree with him, and all the in-between stuff that's neither here nor there is just sort of mushy,
Yeah, that's no, and I mentioned too. We talked once before. It's a Wonderful Life, which is again a superb performance. But that really is, again, the image of your father, decent, hardworking, faithful, compassionate. And I think I mentioned to you that I had seen your grandfather's hardware store in Pennsylvania one time. It was Indiana, Pennsylvania, where he had the Oscar that your father won for the Philadelphia Story in the window.
Yeah.
And I guess that's been made into a museum or something. That was about 20 years ago or so. I was out there for a special church event.
Yeah.
But anyway, it is a wonderful life. I think Frank Capra, who was famous for always having these kind of positive, Capricorn, as it were, positive things. Mr. Smith will be vindicated and so forth. That I mentioned he violates a key point of the production code of that period, which is to show that the villain should never get away with his crime. But Potter never gets caught.
He never gets caught, but the good guy still wins. There's
right. The good guy wins out, but in terms of the production code, you don't ever see Potter getting his comeuppance, and that slid by the production code. Interestingly enough.
Huh.
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions here. The idea of the actor as a real-life role model, most actors don't like that idea that, that they're interviewed and they say, is that what you believe? The character? No, that's just a part. I think Dad had something unique, and I saw it in a Johnny Carson interview. He's a lot different hero than a Clint Eastwood. I just watched Clint Eastwood last night with my wife, High Plains Drifter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and
gee.
That later period defined a hero in a very ambiguous way. I mean, he rapes a woman.
He's really an anti-hero.
Has no feeling for her. Dad did a lot of heroes, and he was, for a lot of us, a real hero. He came on Johnny Carson's show. There's an interview with Dad on Johnny Carson's show. And, Johnny was a very straight up shooter, and it wasn't the most godly show. And Dad came on that show. And, Dad came on that show, and people got up and applauded him. And so Johnny sits down with him finally and says, so, Jim, do you have any New Year's resolutions? And, of course, they're all making their not to drink so much, smoke so much. And Dad says, well, I think I need to talk a little slower. And, he was he served in the war. He did so much. Cary Grant was once asked by a fan, I wish I could be a Cary Grant. And Cary Grant responded, so do I. But I think Dad would say, well, if someone said, I wish I could be like Jimmy Stewart, I think your dad would say, well, I'm trying to be like, I'm trying to be a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he was. I mean, I think acting was, as I say, Dad was a really private person, and he once said in an interview about, this was when he was doing Harvey on stage in London, he said, an actor comes alive when he's acting. And I think for Dad, it was his true self, he could express it and come alive when he was acting. And part of that was his very close connection to his public. He had such respect for them.
And you gotta ask yourself, when he's in the Philadelphia Story, you got Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, who's one of the most sophisticated, handsome actors in the world. And let's face it, Dad was not the most handsome guy. He was not the most dynamic guy. And he totally holds his own with all of them. How is that possible?
That was just a wonderful film. And that's a film where I thought, oh, that's too bad. I mean, he really liked Katharine Hepburn. They should have got together.
Yeah. Right.
It's like in It's a Wonderful Life. I felt really sorry for George Bailey because he wanted to travel and see the world, and he gave it up to help people.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But, Dad, was Dad, and when he started out in Hollywood, do you know, was were there people saying, Jimmy, you don't have the looks, you don't have that powerful persona? I mean, did Dad have a hard time getting broken into Hollywood?
Dad always said he he was incredibly lucky, and he got signed up with a studio, big studio. I can't remember which one it was, because they saw him on stage in New York, and so when he came to Hollywood, he had or very soon had a contract with a studio. And he said, the contract system, the studio system, big studio system was, on the one hand, kind of controlled actors, but on the other hand, he said, you never were out of work, and it was an unbelievable learning experience for the craft. And they kind of took you in, and they said, you're going to do this movie, and you didn't have much choice, but he said you ended up doing all kinds of, you look at Dad's early life in Hollywood, he made so many movies.
Oh, yeah.
One after the other.
I know Larry King asked him, did you ever play a bad guy? And Dad said, yes, twice. I played a bad guy in The Big Circus and Another Thin, and in the film Another Thin Man.
Yeah, he's the murderer in that one.
Yeah.
What was the name of that film?
Another Thin Man.
The second Thin Man movie.
But the circus was the Greatest Show on Earth.
Yeah. Oh yes, the Greatest Show on Earth.
Yes,
he's
a good bad guy.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a
lovable,
villain in that film. No, yeah, he's hiding a dark secret. That's a little different.
Hiding a dark secret, but what he did was compassionate.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Is Dad's favorite film Harvey?
I think he said his favorite film was It's a Wonderful Life, because I think that is the performance he's most proud of.
Okay.
But he sure loved Harvey, too.
Oh, yeah. I've watched that about 10 times already.
Oh, he loved that rabbit.
Right. Yeah, right.
And I saw him do Harvey on stage in London. It was just amazing.
Wow.
You can, at the end, he would come on stage and take a bow. Get a standing ovation every time, and then he would motion to the wings to invite Harvey to come on stage and bow with him. And the audience heads all turned to the wings, and then the heads moved slowly back, watching the invisible rabbit walk down. Unbelievable.
How old were you when you lost your dad?
I was something like 48.
And what was that like, if I could ask you? That must have been devastating.
It was devastating, but Dad had been very unhappy and really retreated after Mom died 3 years before. And no one ever thought that Mom would go first. She was 10 years younger. And she was the live wire in the relationship. And so, he was 89, but it was sudden. He didn't have to go to the hospital. And what happened afterwards was so emotional and heartening, to the way the public behaved, the way the press behaved. Get choked up talking about it. It took me to places my heart had never been.
Is that right?
Yep.
Can you tell me a little, or am I getting too personal?
Back at the funeral, when we were driving to the church, and the streets were lined with people that were quiet. They weren't yelling. It was so respectful. So was the press. Never seen, it was something.
Yeah.
You felt like it was the end of an era.
Yep. And just the support from the public was just meant so much.
Well, there are so many heroes we have today. We have so many heroes that we then later on read about. And then we're so disillusioned and so disappointed. We say, I thought this was a great man, and he was a sleaze bag.
Right.
Yeah.
But Dad was real. He wasn't
Yeah.
perfect, but he was real.
Yeah. He never
Yeah.
stopped being real. You know, the public had an image of him that they treasured, you know, every man, as you said, and he never let them down.
No.
Wow.
And the fact is, he was able to communicate, in you know, these we're talking about, whether it's George Bailey or whether it's Scotty in Vertigo or whatever, a vulnerability. You know, he wasn't a plaster saint. He wasn't, someone who was beyond the standard of an ordinary. He was an ordinary person who did the right thing, but was vulnerable too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, he gets really negative, and It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, at the right before the Clarence shows up, he's terrible. He's yelling at his kids. He's fighting with his wife. He's just
one
on a tirade.
The spare scenes of cinema
Yeah.
history to me.
Yeah.
That scene in the bar.
Here's my take on that film, because that's my favorite film. Terry, my wife Terry, and I we watch that every Christmas. And I got to tell you, I've watched it about 20 times and I still get teary-eyed. But here's George Bailey. Here's George Bailey. He does everything right. And in the end, it seems like he gets everything wrong. He's the victim of unfairness, deception, ruination. And it's right at that very point that one could summarize there's no God. There's no fairness in life. There's no logic to life. Just, you just got to survive, except for this most desperate time. He says, I remember he says, "Dear Jesus, please help me." And in other words, I don't want to believe that life is some cosmic joke. And the irony is he doesn't turn from God, but in that moment he turns to God, that where I would probably say, I don't want to say the word F, okay, but screw this. I've done everything right, and this is the kind of God you are? Who wants you? Who needs you? Who needs to believe in you?
Exactly.
And it seems that
I don't want to know. Right.
It seems like he's forsaken. But, what keeps me from being like to that level in my life, because I see so much horror in the world, is that I say, you know what? George Bailey is a paradigm of Jesus Christ, who did everything right and got himself across. And for me, what's true for George Bailey is true for me, because if in the end, everyone's against him, but there's one little angel up there in heaven with God that's for him, and he gets through it, and he realizes in the end that with love he can do anything. And you only got two alternatives in life, in my mind, from that film. You can take the old life where George goes into that terrible place that's called his town, and everybody's living for themselves, and there's no God. Or, you could take that rougher road, that narrow road, where he's going to stay there and he gets rewarded. So I would be an atheist if it weren't for Jesus. I mean, I always tell people that if I didn't have Jesus, I'd be an atheist, because life seems to laugh at me and say, "Are you crazy? You believe in this God? And look at life. It stinks." Yeah. But George says, "You know what? There has to be something more," and he finds it.
Yeah. You know what I really take from It's a Wonderful Life is he was in the depths, and how can life really, really, is this what it is? It's so awful. And he was shown that, yes, life is really hard. There's no fairness. It sucks. But there's human connection, and that's what we have. We're in it together. Mm-hmm. There's human, and at the end, no man is a failure if he has friends.
Right.
It's the richness of human hearts that we have to believe in.
So, Kelly, if you could see Dad one more time, what would you want to say to him right now?
Oh, God, I would say to him, first of all, I'm really glad you didn't have to live through 2020.
Right. Yeah, very true.
The really wonderful thing with both my parents is when they died, I didn't feel like I had so much still to say to them. We had said it. We had said what mattered.
I guess you want to feel like your life is an act of gratitude to Dad.
Oh yeah. I mean, I would say to Dad, look at my wonderful life.
You made me a wonderful life.
That's what I would
You
say.
made Dad. You
And
gave me a wonderful life.
Mom and Dad set me on the path to have a wonderful life.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Because a lot of kids, a lot of Hollywood kids growing up don't have that feeling.
Yeah, well, they didn't have my parents.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah.
Well, we had your parents too. We shared with your dad and you all that Dad gave to the world, and all I can say is we love Dad, we love you, and we're so thankful that he came into this world as a gift from God and is with God. So we're so thankful to have you on the show today.
Well, what I want to thank you for is during this whole conversation, you've been calling him Dad.
Well, we love you.
Well, yeah.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah, Kelly.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure speaking with you. It was a pleasure speaking with you earlier. And yeah, by all means, get that 4K restoration of Vertigo.
I certainly will. You've inspired me to watch more Hitchcock.
And Kelly, when I go to heaven, if I go before you, I'm going to say to Dad, Kelly loves you and gives you her regards.
Well, thank you, and I'll do the same if I get there before you.
All right.
Okay.
Well, God bless. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to
It's 10 times the terror.
the podcast.
You are impossible.
Well, your well-intentioned but totally wrong. Thank you for listening to 10 Times the Terror. This podcast would not be possible without listeners like you. You can find out more about our podcast by visiting our website, 10timestheterror.com. That's 10xtheterror.com.